Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I have a few things I want to share with you in this video. Starting with the fact that tomorrow is August 3rd. In some recent videos, I've suggested that August 3rd is a date to watch because we've noticed that the church likes to do groundbreakings, dedications, announcements on special anniversaries. I'm not saying that anything is going to happen tomorrow, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was an announcement or something like that. But August 3rd, 1831 is when the Temple Lot was dedicated. Joseph Smith was here personally for the dedication of the Temple Lot. This was the first temple announced in this dispensation, so it's highly significant. It will be built someday. But whatever the case, whether it's the Temple Lot or the purchase of the auditorium, if that ever happens, or other significant things, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened on August 3rd because we've already seen some examples of this. If we go up to far west, you have the temple site and you have these three monuments. And on this monument to the right, at the bottom, there's a plaque. And if you look at that closely, it talks about the fact that the dedication of improvements and beautifications of the far west site was on the 3rd of August, 1968, by President Alvin R. Dyer, who was a member of the first presidency. If we look at the Independence Visitor Center, which was built to be one of the 24 temples of the 24 temple complex, but to be used for now as a visitor center, I've done the research and the groundbreaking for this building was on August 3rd. I'd have to look at my timeline to see what year. I can't remember that exactly, but they intentionally did this on August 3rd. And I actually have a quote from the David O. McKay diaries that talks about the fact that they wanted to either do the groundbreaking or the dedication on August 3rd. Here's another picture of it at night. I love how you have these big windows and it allows for you to look inside the building and you can see the Christus inside. And then more recently, up in Nauvoo, they dedicated the new Nauvoo Temple Visitor Center on June 27th, the anniversary of the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. And the same thing when the reconstructed Nauvoo Temple was dedicated. They made sure to do it on the anniversary of the martyrdom and close to the same time as when he was killed. So I think there is reason to believe that we will see other things in the future on sacred anniversaries. This is inside the new Nauvoo Temple Visitor Center. I would encourage you to go and visit it. It is well worth the visit, but it is pretty amazing in there. Okay, another thing. I noticed recently that as we think about the upcoming Salt Lake Temple dedication next year in 2027, I noticed recently that the city of Independence was founded March 29th, 1827. So in other words, the Salt Lake Temple is going to be dedicated 200 years after the city of Independence was founded. Now, I know that Independence is in Missouri and the Salt Lake Temple is in Utah, but there is a connection between these two sites. There's more than one. We've talked about, for example, you have I-70 that stops in Utah as you're going west. It comes right through Independence. There's actually 7 exits off of I-70 in Independence. But we've talked about the fact that the year that the Salt Lake Temple was first dedicated in 1893, a few months later, President Woodruff in the first presidency, the Tabernacle Choir, and others made a trip to the Chicago World Fair and they stopped in Independence. This was just a few months after the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated. They stopped in Independence. The Tabernacle Choir sang. The mayor at the time of Independence came and greeted, President Woodruff and the others. So I don't know but it doesn't feel like it's a coincidence. I think it's more than just coincidence that this is lining up the 200. And it's not that the Solid Temple is going to be, it's not going to be dedicated on March 29th because the open house isn't going to start until April. But still, 200 years later, after the founding of independence, we're going to have the rededication of the Solid Temple. Here's a couple of recent pictures that I took of the courthouse. This is the courthouse that's mentioned in Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord is identifying where the temple should be built, that it's supposed to be built um, just a little bit west of the courthouse. Well, they've preserved the courthouse. Here it is. And when you walk up to it, it talks about the fact that this is the first courthouse of Jackson County, erected 1827. So just interesting to think about. So what I did is I realized that I've come across a number of quotes where you've had people in church leadership talking about the fact that it's time to start thinking about Missouri. It's time to start um, bringing it to uh, remembrance of the saints, like things like that. And I decided to take those quotes and put them all on this row, what's currently row 435 for Missouri, growth and return to. And we have some really new quotes, and then we have quotes that go back to President Lorenzo Snow. So I think what we'll do, let's do it backwards. Let's start with the most recent quotes. So we have this from Sister Rebecca McDavitt Morgan, the wife of Elder Jeremiah J. Morgan of the 70. He was in the area presidency of this area, and he used to be RLDS, now known as Community of Christ, but he left them when they were still the RLDS. And this is something that she said. When Elder Morgan began serving as stake president in the Liberty, Missouri stake in 2009, the stake boundaries were around 3 hours driving from one end to the other. Now, 3 more stakes have been formed from that stake: the Far West, Grand River, which is the Adamonte-Ammon stake, and Shoal Creek, Missouri stakes. Shoal Creek stake is essentially the Hans Mill stake. It's a miracle, Sister Morgan said. Missouri is an incredible place to be. I'm not sure that there's anybody who loves Missouri more than Jeremiah and Rebecca Morgan. End quote. Living so close to many church historic sites, Sister Morgan knows, quote, so many beautiful things happen there, and so many beautiful things will happen there. The Lord is preparing a place and a people. Now, I need to do more research, but it doesn't seem like we have very many of these kind of statements, at least not in recent times. There may be more, but it's a little bit more on the rare side. But talking specifically about Missouri, I think it's really interesting that she said that. But then we have it from her husband, Elder Jeremiah J. Morgan of the 70. This was an outgoing message as he was ending his time in the area presidency. You can find this on the Church of Jesus Christ KC Facebook page, July 23rd, 2025. So this is very recent. And I'm just going to read this last part. He goes through the fact that there's been tremendous growth in this area, and there's more temple attendance and things like that. And then at the end, he says, you and I can be a part of that same spiritual momentum. This is the great work of the kingdom here in this area, and we can all be a part of it. I testify to you, as President Nelson has said, the best is yet to come. And remember, President Nelson said that in the context of the second coming, that it's the second coming that's referring to. And so it is for each of us, and for this area in particular. That's really exciting. Let's go back to 2012. This is Elder William R. Walker of the 70. Church News, Kansas City Temple provides healing moment. So the occasion was the upcoming dedication of the Kansas City Temple. I'm just going to read this last part. Elder Walker remarked, quote, It is a great day for us, the church returning to Missouri in such a magnificent way to where the prophet Joseph once walked. Now let's go to President Alvin R. Dyer, counselor in the first presidency. This is from his book, The Refiner's Fire, the edition that was published in 1969. This is the one that basically oversaw the purchase of Adam-ondi-Ahman, the beautification of the Far West Temple site, the construction of the Independence Visitor Center. He used to be the mission president of the Central States Mission, and he was involved in all the different Missouri historical societies. And President David O. McKay brought him into the first presidency because of his knowledge of church history in Missouri. So he wrote this book, and in the beginning of it, he says, to know the history and to visit the places of prophetic historical renown in Jackson, Clay, Caldwell, and Daviess counties in Missouri is to experience a feeling, a sense of the nearness of these mighty events of the future that will transpire in these consecrated places. No doubt, this is due in part to the increasing awareness of that which has already occurred and of its relationship to the future, serving to make it more alive and more vital. And even so, one cannot deny, on the other hand, that time is getting shorter. The blueprint of God's plan is before us. The fulfillment of prophecy occurs almost daily. The balance of time is waning. In the words of James E. Talmage, quote, the end is nearer than most men would wish, end quote. For come he will, the Son of God, in all his glory and majesty to fulfill his purpose and usher in the time of further preparation and the millennium. It seems that he wrote this book to help wake up the saints to the reality of Missouri, that it's not, these different sites are not just lost to time, that the church has purchased them, beautified them, and that there's a future for them. So again, this was in the 1960s. I have another quote from him a little bit earlier. This was at a BYU devotional, February 7th, 1967. The name of the talk is The Center Place of Zion. Okay, let's see. It's just going to be this part right here. It is the responsibility and the obligation of every servant of God in this dispensation, according to this revelation, to bear record unto the children of men that the gospel of Jesus Christ has been restored for the redemption of the individual, and secondly, for the gathering of the children of God from throughout the earth, that there may be ushered in the millennial reign. And this is stated in many of the revelations. The time has come, I believe, to reestablish the image of Christ's church more formidably in the consecrated and dedicated land of Missouri. I think that President McKay feels this, and only recently he has authorized that the things that transpired on the memorable visit we had 7 months ago to Adam-ondi-Ahman and the cities of Far West, Missouri, and Jackson County in general, and Independence, that these things now can be written, that here's the part right here, that we may in some way bring back to the consciousness of the people of this church, those who are faithful to their covenants, that God established this work in that place, and that to fulfill it, there must be built the city of the New Jerusalem, as revealed by the Lord to the Gentiles who came in and numbered among the children of Israel, by the sons and daughters of Ephraim, and by the remnant of Jacob, who are the Lamanites, and they shall build the city of the New Jerusalem. And there shall be erected in that city a temple complex, such has never been known in the annals of earth's lifetime, wherein there shall be, as the center of that complex, the temple of the New Jerusalem, where the Lord will make his appearance in the administrative responsibilities of the government of the earth, and it will be sustained and supported by 23 other temples, all named after various orders of the priesthood. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and skip down. But we need, I believe, to reflect upon the initial things that God has restored to us that pertain to the establishment of these great cities to culminate the work of the Lord in reference to these cities of Zion in Missouri. The last two that I have are from President Lorenzo Snow. Okay, this is the October 1900 General Conference. Through this man, Joseph Smith, the Lord has said to us what I have been reading. As some of the brethren stated in their addresses here, I think that there was a need of a reformation among the Latter-day Saints. I believe that reformation has already commenced. One of the evidences of this to me is that the Latter-day Saints throughout all the stakes of Zion have done that which they never did before in regard to paying their tithing. They have paid twice the amount of tithing this year and last year than they paid 2 years ago. It is wonderful how the saints have reformed in this duty, especially in view of the fact that the Latter-day Saints have always had trouble to reform themselves in money matters. They could not do it in the day in which the revelation was given. Joseph, by the way, the revelation was given in far west Missouri. Joseph tried to develop them so that they would conform to the law of consecration, which is in advance of the law of tithing, and is a principle which, as sure as I am speaking, you and I will one day have to conform to. When that day comes, we will be prepared to go to Zion. We will not take possession of the land of Zion by force. If we should do, it would turn out to us as it did with the people who were upon the land of Zion when this revelation was given. As the Lord here tells us, there are only two ways in which we can come into possession of that land. One way is by purchase, and if by purchase ye are blessed. The other way is by blood, and if by blood, as you are forbidden to shed blood, lo, your enemies are upon you, and ye shall be scourged from city to city, and from synagogue to synagogue, and but few shall stand to receive an inheritance. I'm going to skip down a little bit. He says, there are some perhaps within the sound of my voice who will receive an inheritance in Jackson County before they pass into the next life. And that came true. Continuing, it is a manifestation that a grand preparation is coming. Jackson County is the point that we should have continually in view. We cannot consider ourselves prepared, however, to go back to Jackson County when we fail to pay our tithing. And then skipping down, let us all exercise faith for the Lord to open the way that we may go back to Jackson County. All right. And then the last thing is this. It's essentially the same thing. Educate them to pay their tithing in full. Then we will have a people prepared to go to Jackson County. Now we should make the preparation for this. And then I guess this can be the last thing. I do not know how soon we may be called to build up Jackson County, but I feel it is nearer at hand than Latter-day Saints generally believe. Now, what's interesting is if we go to my spreadsheet this is like a timeline of church history in Missouri. I think I understand why he said that. I'm piecing it all together. I don't have everything yet. This is a long-term project, but recently I came across this. In 1888, there was a special mission given to Elder Andrew Jensen of the 70. He was to go to Missouri as well as other places to collect information and kind of like almost like scout it out is is how it comes across when you read the account. But uh, basically to collect information for church history. So he went to all the different church sites here in Missouri. And then we already talked about the fact that not too long, just, in the same year that the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated, President Wilford Woodruff, the First Presidency, the Tabernacle Choir, Orson F. Whitney, they went to Independence. They visited the temple lot. The Tabernacle Choir sang, which I think is so interesting that the president of the church would go to Independence the same year that the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated, because so far it's been hard for me to find any accounts of any president of the church coming to Independence, Missouri. It's very rare. It doesn't happen very often at all. Okay. Later, July 6, 1896, there was a special mission sent to the Kansas City and Independence area with a number of elders, and it was a special music type, like a musical performance type mission. And then in 1897, the first branch was organized in Independence with Richard Preeter as branch president. This was the first branch in Independence, in Independence, since the expulsion from Jackson County in 1833. So, in my mind, that essentially is when the return began, as far as members of the church permanently staying in Independence and Jackson County. 1897. 1898, Lorenzo Snow becomes president of the church, and then we get those quotes that we read from him just a minute ago. So these are the things that led up to him becoming president of the church. And then in 1900, the Central States Mission moved from Kansas to Kansas City, Missouri. On October 7th, 1900, there was an interesting occurrence where a short time before the October General Conference, the Church of Christ Temple Lot, the small church that owns the Temple Lot, offered to unite with our church and the RLDS to build the temple on the Temple Lot, which President Snow rejected because that's not how temples are constructed. It has to be by the proper authority. It's not a joint project between different churches. 1902, Elder J.G. Duffin, the president of the Southwestern States Mission, receives a letter from the city engineer of Independence informing him that a large portion of the temple land is now up for purchase. This is referring to the land that the church currently owns, that the Independence Visitor Center is on, and then that big, empty area behind it where, for the 4th of July, it's usually on the 5th of July, they do the big fireworks show. I've shown pictures and videos of that before. So that's when we got our piece of the temple land. This was shortly after the passing of President Lorenzo Snow. So when he was president of the church, unless it was revealed to him, he didn't know that this was going to happen just a year later. Wait, okay. No, he died in 1901. Yeah, just a year later, that's when the offer was given to the church to purchase the temple land. Maybe Lorenzo Snow said a special prayer or prayed with the brethren that this would happen. I don't know, but he passed away after having said all that about tithing, returning to Jackson County, that it's not as far away as some people think. And then the next year after he dies, we actually purchased that portion of temple land. That's when we got word that it was available. And then the next year, 1903, the first presidency authorized the purchase of the land. In that year, it happened to be exactly 70 years since the expulsion. So this was 1903. The expulsion was in 1833 from Jackson County. And then April 15th of 1904, that's when the church purchased the 25 acres of temple land. And then 1907, Independence became the headquarters of the Central States Mission. Um, Also, that same year, the Zion Printing and Publishing Company established in Independence, and the publishing of the Liahona began. So this is where the Liahona began, was here in Independence. It's gone through different iterations in other parts of the world, but ultimately it started in Independence, and now it's the church-wide um, magazine for adults. And then in that same year, the Relief Society was organized in Independence. And then the last thing I want to cover here for this part, 1914, President Joseph F. Smith dedicates the first chapel in Independence since the expulsion in 1833. Okay, so this period right here, the 1890s and 1900s mostly, was a very busy time in church history when it comes to Missouri, especially Independence. Okay, so it kind of makes sense why President Snow was thinking so much about um, the return to Jackson County, because this is when some major things were going on in church history in this area. Later on, one of those other quotes that I read came from, sorry, before I get to that, we have those couple quotes from President Dyer. So 1966, that's when we purchased the primary portion of land at Adamonte-Ammon, which included Spring Hill. Spring Hill is where the temple, the city, and the temple were going to be built. 1968, on August 3rd, so here it is right here, that's when ground was broken for the Independence Visitor Center. Again, that building is not just a visitor center, it's meant to be a temple in the future, one of the 24 temples. March 25th, 1971, President Spencer W. Kimball, at that time acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, created the Independence Stake, the fourth in Missouri, but the first time that the Independence Stake was created. And this was 140 years from the time that Joseph Smith identified Independence as the site of the city of Zion, because that was back in 1831, and this is 1971. And then May 31st of 1971, the Independence Visitor Center was dedicated by President N. Eldon Tanner. So this is another period of activity. So we have the 1890s and 1900s. That's like a really important time as far as church history in Missouri. And then the late 60s and early 70s, this was like probably the next most exciting time. And this is when we're getting these quotes that I read to you, is around these times. And then the next exciting period of time, sorry, I should say this too. 1976, during the bicentennial year of the United States, Missouri Governor Christopher S. Bond officially rescinds the Missouri Executive Order 44, otherwise known as the Extermination Order. I would love to know if you were born before 1976, because if you were alive at a time that this law, this order, was still on the books, all the way up until 1976. And then in that same year, the church presented the city of DeWitt, Missouri, with a special historical marker, just talking about the fact that this would have been another. This is where some of the saints were trying to settle. It was going to be another stake of Zion, but they were driven out of DeWitt. Okay, now fast forward to 2012. This is the next big, I don't know how to call it. The next most important time, it seems like, in the return to Missouri. So April 6th of 2012, of all days, the governors of Missouri and Kansas released proclamations acknowledging the contributions of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Then, the next month, two really big things happen. On the 5th of May, There was a transfer of property from Community of Christ to our church. We purchased Hans Mill, the Far West Burial Ground, the Joseph Smith Senior Home in Kirtland, Ohio, and 6,000 acres of Missouri farmland, which I'm assuming is mostly the land that surrounds Far West, although I'm not 100% sure about that at the moment. The day after the purchase of Hans Mill and these other pieces of land, the Kansas City, Missouri was dedicated by President Thomas S. Monson. I've pointed out before that for some reason, when we look at all the temples in the church and we look at this like special two spire design where it seems to follow the pattern of the Salt Lake Temple, which has 6 spires, but you have a bunch of temples that only have 2 spires, but the 2 spires, one is taller than the other, just like the Salt Lake Temple. In the Salt Lake Temple, the central spire in the front of the temple is taller than the central spire in the back of the temple. And these temples seem to follow that pattern, but just with 2 spires only. And the only locations where you find temples like that, out of all the temples that we have worldwide, they are all either in Utah. So these are all the 2-spired temples in Utah. Just so you can get a look at what I'm talking about, click on that. Here's the Heber Valley, Utah temple. It has this tall front spire and a shorter one in the back. Let's look at this one. Here's the Brigham City, Utah temple. If we could get a good picture of it, maybe not. Let's try. Here's the Logan, Utah temple, a pioneer era temple. It followed that same pattern, tall spire in the front, shorter one in the back. So they're all in Utah with just a few exceptions. The only other ones in the United States are in Kansas City, the Kansas City, Missouri temple, and then the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania temple, which I think that that's the case because Philadelphia is where the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were signed. So it's a very significant location because essentially that's the signing of those documents led to the conditions in which the church could be restored. If it wasn't for what happened in Philadelphia, the church would not have been restored the way that it was. And then the only other 2, one is in Rome, the Rome, Italy temple. President Nelson said that the dedication of this temple was a hinge point in the history of the church. And then, too far. The only other one is this one over here in Wellington, New Zealand. I don't know if that's because, this is where the Maori are from. They're from New Zealand, and we know that they're descended from the Nephites. I still don't know. But for some reason, only in New Zealand, Rome, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and all the rest of them are in Utah. Okay, so let's go back to this. So the purchase of Hans Mill and then the dedication of the Kansas City, Missouri temple. And then in that same month, there was the dedication of the Caldwell County Welcome Center in Kingston, Missouri, which Kingston became the county seat after the Saints were driven from Far West, because Far West used to be the county seat. And it has a room inside called the Mormon room. I still haven't visited it, but I just learned about this recently. I had seen it before as I was making a video about a historical marker in Kingston, and I saw this building, but I didn't know that it had anything to do with church history, or that it had like a exhibit inside that has to do with church history. I'm going to try and visit this. There's some of these places that you can only visit by appointment. So if you're here, here's the number. There's 2 numbers that you can call if you want to visit it yourself. It's the same thing with the 1827 courthouse in Independence. This is another one that I want to come and visit. Sorry, I don't have the number for that pulled up, but anyway. Okay, so we had that. And then, so you see how these quotes that I've read, they correspond with these periods of significant activity in Missouri. It's just really interesting. So it's all very exciting. You look at the Kansas City area, oops, and we do have a number of meeting houses here. In fact, just before I started recording this video, I just happened to come across this story from the Kansas City Star talking about a new meeting house that it doesn't seem that it's been fully approved yet, but it's essentially going to be up in what's called the Northland, which my understanding is that the Northland is this part of Kansas, the Kansas City metro area that's north of the Missouri River. So we have these three meeting houses right now, and then there's going to be a fourth, it seems. And I think it's going to be up here. So that's exciting. We're getting another little red dot on the map. And then what's also exciting is that we're getting this new temple in Springfield, Missouri, which will bring the total number of temples in Missouri to 3. The first one was the St. Louis, Missouri temple. Oops, I didn't mean to zoom in, but that was the first one. And then the Kansas City temple after that. And now the newest one is going to be down in Springfield. So I don't know. It just seems like exciting things are happening. It's all methodical. It's according to the Lord's timing. But August 3rd, whether it's this year or sometime in the future, I do expect that something will happen on August 3rd. At the very least, whenever this temple is actually constructed, I'm all but certain that it'll be dedicated on August 3rd. Or maybe the groundbreaking will be on August 3rd. We'll just have to wait and see. All right, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.